So welcome to best practices for adopting usage and consumption models, revenue leakage, and entitlements. Tracking entitlements, managing license rights, and incorporating product usage data into dev plans are really now viewed as integral to a world-class monetization capability. However, at MGI, our research shows that less than 15% of organizations today have a modern entitlements and usage management solution, and over 85% of companies struggle to maintain a single source of truth just when it comes to entitlements. So to help shed more light on what the state of the art is for adopting usage models, plugging revenue leakage, and managing entitlements, I'm joined by Nicole Segerer, Vice President of Product Management and Marketing at Revenera. Nicole is one of the leading lights on the topic of entitlements management and license compliance, and we are delighted to have her in conversation today. Welcome, Nicole.
Hi, Andrew, and thanks for having me here.
Yeah, so let's jump right into it. So let's start with what's really the use case for, as you guys describe it, software usage analytics, and talk to us about what's the cost of ignoring this problem.
Great question, Andrew. Thank you. So we've invested a lot over the past few years to add usage analytics to our software monetization and entitlement management that companies cannot really monetize effectively if they don't understand the usage of their product. So why would you do that, and what is the case? First of all, managing software usage and understanding usage really helps product teams making better decisions. In the past, they made decisions based on anecdotal feedback, what they heard from their customers, maybe some analysis of support cases or some research, but there is no holistic view. So with usage analytics, you get to a point where you can really analyze, understand what is happening, and then make decisions about where to invest, where not to invest, where to grow a product versus where to put it into maintenance mode. That is something that every software company has a hard time figuring that out. And by understanding what exactly is happening and how users are using it and what exactly is being used, you basically get yourself to the next level. The next is, you mentioned it before, consumption-based models. When you look at monetization, consumption-based models are becoming more and more modern. More people are looking at it, both from the software suppliers as well as their end customers. We see a need to go to monetization models that are more aligned with what is actually being used. And then, of course, in order to get there, you've got to understand usage and measure it, so that you can build it in the right way. It's obviously important to measure that for a while and to understand it before you even contemplate moving to a consumption-based model, so that you can make a good decision on the metric and everything around that. And then last but not least, usage analytics is also really important for compliance purposes, right? Are your customers using more than they've paid for? Is there maybe even a piracy issue out there where you see usage from customers that are not, well, from companies that are not your customers, I should say, right? These are things that a lot of software companies today don't understand as well as they should. And that is something where usage analytics can help as well to build a bigger picture of what is the usage out there and what of it is paid versus what of it is actually intentional or unintentional overuse. So what is the cost of ignoring that? The cost of ignoring that is you might not have the right data to make good decisions. It might put you at a competitive disadvantage where you're up against companies that are understanding usage, and you fall behind because you can't really deliver as well as your competitors on the features that your customers love and need. And then also from a monetization perspective, we see a growing need to go to consumption-based models. And if there's a blocker there because you cannot do it because you don't understand usage, we also believe that there's a price for that, and that's probably not a position that software companies want to be in moving forward. We do see companies, there's a success story out there about TextMist, one of our customers. They might be known to the audience here. They implemented usage analytics. They actually saw a really high return on investment by better converting trial users, better adapting their software to what their customers needed, and they really saw a high return of investment on their programs there. So that maybe as a first summary on usage.
Great. And who's the typical buyer of this type of solution? Who's the economic buyer, and who are the typical users of the system itself?
Good question. So very often that starts with product management teams who have an initiative to say, okay, what is actually going on there? What are users doing with the product? Which areas are they using? Which modules are they using? Can we understand that better? Also, the need for telemetry information. What platform is my software running on if it's on premises? So that often starts with a product team. Sometimes you get even higher level strategic initiatives coming down from the C-level, who's driving a more data-driven program around future product development. And then the actual users are widespread. It starts with product management, certainly goes into marketing, product marketing, but also goes into engineering. We're talking about data-driven decision-making here. So there's nothing better for engineers than to actually get feedback on what happens on some of the things that they developed and built into the product, and if customers are using these things as they were intended. Then, of course, when you go into the more of the monetization space and consumption-based business models, then you will see product operations come in as well that make sure that the consumption information is, is collected in a way that it can be used for billing and invoicing.
Got it. So many companies, many organizations are moving today from an on-premise perpetual license model to an as-a-service term license and consumption-based pricing models. What, in your experience, are the most common challenges and pitfalls that are encountered along the way? And do you see any nuances between, say, a hardware manufacturer or a physical goods manufacturer that's shifting to selling as a service as compared to the challenges that, say, a typical software company might encounter?
Yeah, so let me start with some of the challenges that we are seeing. There's two parts of it. The first part is more what I would call a organizational or cultural challenge, right? When you're looking to move to a new deployment model and a new business model, of course, you've got to overcome some misalignment within the organization. There might be different opinions of what you should be doing. For example, think about a company moving from more of a perpetual model, moving on to subscription or consumption, right? You're facing some risk with every change of a business model, and that is something that organizations have to work on. And then, of course, there's more of the financial part. With any move to a recurring revenue model, no matter if that would be more of a subscription time-based model or a consumption-based model, and away from perpetual licensing, you go through the first initial dip in revenues where you are changing that. And that needs to be budgeted for on the side of the software company. So these are just things that we recommend for companies to think through them, to plan them out, and to go in with a firm plan. And then also to work with their customers, because for customers, it's also a change. It's a change in budgeting. And they might also, embrace it or push back, depending on how good the offer is, of course, but that is something that needs to be taken into account. The other challenge that we see is just properly managing the software lifecycle. As we all know here in this group, the software lifecycle is complex, and there's a lot of things happening between the initial delivery or activation or provisioning through the different changes and updates and patches and new versions and modules added, modules taken away until the customer renewal, right? All of that needs to be managed in a central system. There we really come down to entitlements. And that is something that can be a pitfall, because if you don't have that data together and if you don't have a coherent system in which you manage the software lifecycle, that might actually end up being an unpleasant experience for the end customer if they see friction there. So that's another thing that should be managed well in order to fully understand where customers are along their subscription, when their renewal is due, how likely it is that they renew. All these things are important to understand and build into a back office entitlement management system to successfully move to subscription. Is it different for hardware companies? Not in terms of the solutions that they actually need. We see that the technical use cases are more or less the same. But I would say that the priorities are much different. Hardware companies might often struggle even more with a change of mindset. Think about some of them having decades, sometimes 100 years of a history in building machines or medical devices, whatever it might be, right? And now you get into software and you get into recurring revenue, and that is a change of mindset that shouldn't be ignored, and a transition project that sometimes can take some time. So that is something that they should plan. And then their priorities might be a little bit different in terms of the use cases that they focus on. A hardware company, for example, might focus more on software updates, having an accurate software bill of material that comes with the device, or capturing additional data from that device. So they have a lot of interest in the communication between the back office and the device out there in the field, all with the purpose of understanding what is happening there and being able to update and manage the device out there, which is actually something that is even required in some regulated industries.
Got it. So shifting gears a little bit, in the face of last year's, the pandemic's impact on revenue growth, many companies are now in 2021 focused on revenue leakage. And before 2020, the topic of revenue leakage and license compliance wasn't very sexy. Today, 2021, as some organizations are really stretching to reach their revenue targets, we see increased resources being allocated to license compliance and trying to plug the revenue leakage that's out there. What, if anything, do you see as being new in license management and revenue leakage? What are some of the best practices that you're seeing and that we learned in the recent past here? What can you share with us around this?
Yeah, good question. I agree with your view here. We always talk about, even before this year, we talked about things like licensing and compliance management as part of a maturity curve. When you are in the phase of growing your company, and let's say you're building a startup and you've got 20, 30% growth rates, or double digit, not sure that everyone gets that high. All you care about is selling more. All you care about is scaling, hiring more people. And at that time, you frankly don't have the time, and nor do you have the need to get your back office processes in order. But at some point, there is a phase in the maturity of a company where you have built up a bigger install base, a good number of customers, and very often just because you've grown and you now are a big market player, maybe you don't grow by 15% a year, you only grow by 5%, which is just a normal maturity and nothing is wrong with that. But when you get to that point, this is where, of course, you want to make sure that you automate back office processes, that you take out anything that is manual, that you take out anything that even might be leakage, right? When you think about how you deliver software, who has access to it, what you do when a subscription doesn't renew and the customer, should be switched off at that point. All these things all of a sudden become really important. And that is now compounded, especially in this year, by this crisis where for a lot of companies, revenues and growth rates haven't been exactly what they anticipated. So what we see as a trend here is that there's really more focus on compliance management, because what you do if you cannot bring in the new business that you anticipated, it's just natural to go back and say, do I have any leakage? And that is where you look at compliance and analysis of intentional and unintentional overuse, as I mentioned in the beginning. So that is something that we see as a trend. And in terms of how you do this, there's solutions out there by now, including ours, that really analyze in detail where usage is happening, if it's from a customer or not, if it's piracy or if it's overuse, and that curate that information with data to a point where it really becomes an actionable opportunity for a compliance team to act on. either by themselves or, of course, with a legal partner that manages compliance opportunities. So that is certainly something that we see, and we see companies go after that, not only in their in their core markets like North America or Europe, but also definitely in other markets, thinking about Asia and other areas where sometimes companies were reluctant to go after that just because it's a little bit more complicated. But done well, we definitely see success that some of our customers have. And the other thing that trends are changing. Not only software suppliers sometimes struggled with additional revenue this year, it's also their customers that are tightening up budgets, right? So anything is going to be questioned in terms of the value, and any customer would go in and say, am I really using this? Am I using what I am paying? So I think another trend that we are seeing is, is there a common meter between the software producer and their customer on what is actually being used? And can there be more transparency so that both sides believe that they found a good middle ground in how to work together? That is something that is required more. And that also requires, of course, the back office systems and architecture on the software supplier side to provide that information and to work with the customers moving forward.
So I'm sure you get this question all the time, but I have to ask, which is because we hear it from our clients, which is the age-old build versus buy. For companies that have built their own license and entitlement management solution, what would be the argument you would put forth for buying an off-the-shelf solution? And what are the factors that companies should weigh when they're making that build versus buy decision?
That's a great question, and we see a lot of our customers contemplate that when they start working with us. And frankly, I am leading a product management team. We have to make these decisions. And when you decide about build or buy, I think the first question that you really should ask yourself is, how many resources do I need to build, and for how long? And then what is that really going to cost me? I don't think that there is any software company out there that would say we have more engineers than we need, right? Most of the times you're limited by the number of resources that you have. They drive how quickly you can get to your roadmap, or how long you have to wait to get these things done that you would like to do to innovate. So the question that we ask ourselves when we make build versus buy decisions in other areas, and that our customers are asking themselves, is, should I really use my engineers that are experts in whatever I offer to the market to build something like a licensing and entitlement management solution, or to focus on understanding software usage? It seems like it's not the best use of their time. And what we know from experience and from a lot of research with our customer, it always ends up being more expensive than you think in the beginning. While you start out with a simple use case, this use case grows. That homegrown solution needs to be maintained over time. And then very often, that's the second consideration that I think people should think about. Very often, product functionality and flexibility is just not there. We talked, just today in our conversation here, Andrew, we talked about changing business models. When you're going from one to the other, your licensing solution needs to be flexible. If you have a homegrown solution, very often that is just not the case, which means that at some point, homegrown solutions can become a burden from a financial perspective, but then also from the perspective of just being a limitation of what you're trying to accomplish with your core product. So that is something that we see, that are some of the points that I would suggest people should think about and weigh when they make a decision on build your own or buy a purpose-built solution.
Got it. So we're almost out of time here, but I think we have time for one last quick question, which is one of the themes of the Monetize Forum has been that we've been discussing today. It's been the evolving channel, and B2B and B2C companies have been changing their sales channels. B2B companies are looking to go direct. Some B2C companies are ramping up their B2B channels, and everyone, businesses of all types, are looking to optimize really their omni-channel sales motion. In your experience, what are some of the issues companies tend to overlook or maybe underestimate when it comes to changing distribution channels and the monetization of those channels?
Yeah, let me talk about, I know we don't have a lot of time, so let me make it quick and talk about two things that companies should think about. First is, I would summarize as visibility. When you're selling through a channel and maybe even through a multi-tier channel where you've got distributors and resellers, the question is, how visible are the end customers to you? Do you know who these end customers are? And then more importantly, what do you do when you need to reach out to them? Let's assume your software product has a vulnerability. You need to reach out to end customers, or there's anything else really, right? How do you do this? So when a company is looking to change a channel model or bring in a channel model, it's the advice really is to think early on about how is that model represented in back office systems. And then when we look at it from the entitlement management perspective, of course, an entitlement management system would be able to represent that multi-step relationship in the channel or multi-tier relationship in the channel. And with that, gives the software producer insight into the whole supply chain onto the end customer. And then based, of course, on what is agreed on with the channel partners, at least technically would allow to reach out to the end customers and update them or whatever. So this is something that companies should think about. The other thing you brought up in your question, B2B, B2C. So there is another consideration that I would recommend. In a B2B business model, very often, when you look at it from a licensing and enforcement perspective, companies would go for a strategy where they say, it's most important to me that I would never block my customers. If my customer is running software in their production, I cannot be responsible for that to be stopped just because a license expired, right? You would never do this. That is B2B. Of course, you would measure and you would license, but licensing would always be gentle in a way that it would never disrupt the end customer while they are doing what they need to do. When you look into B2C and you're building up a whole new B2C business model, that all of a sudden becomes different. B2C business models very often are more simple. And in general, the rule is, as long as the end customer pays, they're getting access to the software, but when they stop paying, they don't get access. Hence, in a B2C use case, you would often have a more strict type of enforcement, or even contemplate shutting people down. Obviously, when they're not paying anymore or the subscription has come to an end, obviously, as you would always recommend in a gentle way, sending messages out before notifying customers what's happening. But of course, again, then still be more strict in your enforcement model. So that's maybe 2 points to consider when thinking about new channel models.
Terrific. Well, with that, I'd like to remind everyone that more information is available at the Revenera booth. And I'm sure, Nicole, you'll be around to answer any additional questions. So with that, thanks very much. We're out of time for now, but thanks everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of Monetize Forum 2021. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.